thank you very much for inviting me today. It's great to be here with you, and it's nice, after all of the free meals you've given me, to be able to repay you in some small way. How many of you have been to Ireland? I know several of you have. Coraline has a book of her 2010 trip. And the Sturtevants had said, right, that they have also been to Ireland?
Yes, when we did England and Scotland.
Right.
Kind of a quick.
Right.
Not long enough to.
Sure, sure. Has anybody else? No? Okay. A lot of you guys have done a lot more traveling worldwide than I have, but for some reason, Ireland has been kind of a focus of our lives, probably for the last 25 years or so. It's a bit smaller than Maine, 32,000 square miles, and the population 6.4 million, a little less than Maryland. But Irish descendants in the USA, more than 40 million. So there's far more people of Irish descent here than there are people who are living in Ireland. How many of you think or know that you have some line of Irish descent? Okay. Now here, so maybe you're like me as well. You're a mongrel. I think most of us are, right?
Yeah.
So how many of you know that you have English descent? Or Scottish? Yeah. I also have German. Anyone have German descent? Or French? I also have some French descent. So we're just kind of all mongrels, and so that is kind of nice because you can choose whatever descent you want, and you can kind of focus on that. That's right. That's right. So, so Ireland is two countries on one island. The south, which is about 2/3 or more, really 3/4 of the area, is taken up with the Republic of Ireland. And the south, which is an independent nation, now it has the euro as its currency. And Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, together with England and Scotland and Wales. And of course the pound sterling is the currency there. My Irish roots come from my mother's side. My mother's maiden name was Mullen. Actually, my mother's, yeah, that's right. My mother's maiden name was Mullen.
Sounds like a
that sounds like a song right there, doesn't it? There is a lot to see in Ireland, and I've been there now 4 times, and it's so a significant number of days. I have a kind of a general idea now of the layout of the country, but just like anywhere, there's an awful lot to see. I've come to realize this, that if you were to choose Maryland and to be a tourist in Maryland, even living here, there's enough to see in Maryland that could keep you busy for the rest of your life. And so it's not always a matter of spending a lot of money and going far away. There are a lot of interesting things in almost any area that you would choose to visit. My favorite region is the west of Ireland. This past trip this summer was for my nephew's wedding near Dublin, and so we were forced to save a big amount of our time in the east, or in the in the east. And in the city, and that's not really my idea of a good vacation, but anyhow, but the west is my favorite, and particularly Donegal and Galway and the Aran Islands, and my wife's family is from near Ennis. Her mom is a Murphy, and so it's really hard to track Murphys, because Murphys is the most common surname in all of Ireland. And Dingle is my favorite place. Let me tell you about Dingle. Dingle is in the southwest. It's in County Kerry, but it's not in the Ring of Kerry. There are 3 peninsulas there, and this is in one of the less less touristy, slightly less touristy than the Ring of Kerry on the Dingle Peninsula. It reminds me of a little town that I grew up in Nova Scotia, about 2,000 people. So it's a certain size. All kinds of historical things. The beehive huts that the monks used to live in are there, and all kinds of ruins, as there are in many places in Ireland. And music in the pubs. You could every night of the year there's different musicians there, and I'm a teetotaler, but I like the atmosphere of the Irish pub. Let's just talk about that for a minute. It's not really what we think of as a bar if you've never been to one. I don't know what to call it exactly, but this is a place where very often during the day, one time we interrupted an 8-year-old's birthday party going on at a pub, and there's just kind of a sense of community there, and people eating together and drinking together and kind of living life together. It's kind of a community center type of place, and so there are all kinds of these, but the best ones are, it's really a good experience, and all the better if there's some good music going on there. I've been to Ireland 4 times. In 1991 with my wife Connie and our daughters when they were younger, and that was interesting. I dropped my camera in Galway Bay, and so we never got very many pictures of that trip. 2002, we went for our 25th wedding anniversary, so it was like a second honeymoon for Connie and me, and that was really my favorite vacation of all time. And then in 2004, this was the year before one of our daughters we knew was going to be married, so this was our last us 4 vacation, and we were 18 days in Ireland and Scotland, and I still don't know how much money I spent on that one, but it's okay. I'm not missing it now. But that was also a very interesting and a good trip. And then this past year with my nephew's wedding, and with Connie, and with my daughter Shannon, and her adopted daughter Ramira, who is 6, and you've seen some photos there. She's a little African-American girl. If you've been to any of the Raucous Crew concerts, she's often at those. So that was also interesting. I'll have to say it was my worst vacation ever, but not because of the company. It was just, we can go into that later. If you take a vacation every year, one year is going to have to be the worst year, and it was just this year, that's all. But hey, it was Ireland, so why should you be complaining? So I just wanted to share a little bit about why I originally wanted to go to Ireland and what kept me going back. And without getting too deep, it was the power of myth. And we think of myths as made-up stories, but myths are not, some myths are made up, and some myths are really true stories. What a myth is just a grand story. It's a big story. And so in some ways we can speak of the Christian faith as myth. I believe that it's perfectly true, but it's a big story that kind of encompasses where we came from, and it has a narrative to it, and it has a flow to it, and so it was really the power of myth, I think, that first brought me to Ireland and has kind of kept me coming back. First of all, the myth or the grand story of my ancestry. I said I'm partly German. For some reason I haven't explored my German roots. I'm partly English. I haven't explored those. And I'm also 1/16 Acadien. I'm part of the group of French Canadians in Eastern Canada that emigrated to Louisiana and became the Cajuns. So, you know, I have that connection, which that would be an interesting one to explore, but I really haven't done that yet either. And so, it's that myth of my ancestry. I've chosen to identify with a largely unknown grand story of my Irish ancestry, the Mullins. I seem to have gotten my right brain gifts, music and art and creativity through that Mullen line, my mother and her mother, and most of the musicians and people who do that in my family seem to come from that line. I have found many Mullen tombstones in Old Cemetery on the Aran Island of Inishmore. If you ever have an opportunity to go to Ireland, it's worth spending just a little bit more money to go on a 45-minute ferry ride from near Galway out into Galway Bay. And there are 3 Aran Islands there, but the largest one is Inishmore, a totally treeless island. It's, I don't know, 12 or 14 square miles, but you can stand at the highest point and look back and you can see the whole island because there are no trees. And it's just a rock, and it's very raw. And anyhow, there are some very old cemeteries there, and one of them is just full of Mullins. So I'm saying maybe I have some ancestors who are buried there, but who knows? But it's part of the mythology, right? So there is that. And then the second one is the myth or the grand story of ancient Celtic Christianity. I am very interested in history, pretty much any kind of history I'm interested in. And I have an interest in great northern places. Connie and I like to go on cold weather vacations in the summer. I love Maryland, but I don't like Maryland summers. And so we look for a cold place to go, and Ireland kind of fits that bill. I am interested in these, you know, I'm from Canada, so I am interested in these big, wild places. Jim was just talking that he had gone on a bus trip recently up to Ontario and way up into the woods. And there's just something to me that's, I don't know, I don't think it's just a masculine thing about going to some big place where you see the grandeur of God's creation in a big way. I think I've not been to the Grand Canyon, but I'm guessing the Grand Canyon gives you a sense of that. Usually the ocean gives me a sense of that almost anywhere. And then there are these other great northern places that are kind of raw and bare and beautiful, and there's usually some history involved with them, and that's a place that's really attractive to me. Nova Scotia is such a place where I grew up, and Ireland is such a place. And somewhere along the line I began to learn about the Celtic saints, and I was interested in history, so I read about them. Patrick and Columba and Kevin and Hilda and Mungo and Aidan and others. And 3 books were really influential. One of them is there on the table somewhere, How the Irish Saved Civilization, right there in front of Ruth. And it tells about how in the Dark Ages, after the Roman Empire had fallen and barbarians had kind of taken over and destroyed libraries and all kinds of culture in Europe, there were people who fled, monks particularly, who fled from Europe, and they came as far away as they could from the barbarians, and they ended up in Ireland. And so there were several large monasteries. When I say large, these would be 3,000 or 5,000 monks living there. And they essentially, you know, a big part of their work was recopying the old Roman histories and recopying the ancient Greek classics, and of course copying the scriptures over and over and all kinds of things. And so there really is a sense that a lot of what we think of as Western civilization was kind of maintained through the work that those monks did in Ireland in the 5th century and 6th century and 7th century, through that period of time. And then a second one is The Celtic Way of Evangelism by a professor at Asbury, a United Methodist guy. The Celtic Way of Evangelism, How Christianity Can Reach the West Again. He looks at how Patrick evangelized Ireland, and he takes principles from that for us thinking about how we can reach people in a culture today that's kind of a different kind of culture. And also the book Ancient Future Faith by Robert Weber, these three, and a lot of others as well. And about the same time, I kind of went through a phase of life where I seriously explored Catholicism. Don't tell anybody about that, okay? But I really was very interested in it. I read a lot, and I couldn't quite get back there, but I have a lot of appreciation for Catholicism. Not just Roman Catholicism, you know. One day I was at a laundromat, don't ask me why I was there, and I don't know how we got started with this. The lady said, well, I'm Catholic, and I said, yeah, I'm Catholic too. And we can all say that, right? Because we're Catholics. We're small C Catholics. And about the same time, a friend introduced me to Irish folk music, and most of you know that I've been part of a band that does Irish and Scottish and Canadian folk music. It's all pretty similar in a lot of ways. And my thoughts and imagination were just full of wonderful ideas and options. I don't know if you ever had a phase of your life where you just kind of followed a certain path and it just seemed like the whole big world of ideas opened up to you in a way that was really had an impact on you. I've since come out of that phase. I'm not really exploring Catholicism today. I'm too busy to do that. But Ireland is still a fascinating place for me because of its people. I bet if you visited Ireland, you have some story to tell of some person that you met. What I've found is that they seem to be very gregarious, social people, normally very friendly and open. Even in Dublin, a city of 1.1 million, there still seems to be a friendliness there. I told you about going into this pub where the 8-year-old's family was having his birthday party. This was when Connie and I did our 25th anniversary trip. We were looking for a particular place in the city of Ennis in the west, and we had looked and tried to figure out where this was, and so we said, well, what do we do? Well, we'll ask some locals, you know. So we went into this pub, and this was the family that was kind of nearest to the door, and I don't know, we got started in conversation with them, and nothing would do but what they had to get up from the table and drive us around for half an hour in their car, looking for this place, which we never found. But what it says to me, that's just kind of a illustration of the warmth and just the willingness of people. It's just a very friendly people. I'm sure there must be some really curmudgeons among them, you know, but most of them that you meet will be that kind of person. And then, if you're interested in castles and ruins and ancient landmarks, I guess almost anywhere in Europe you can find these, but they seem to be in great abundance in Ireland. Its history, it's a wild history, and of course the beauty of it. Somebody was looking at Coralyn's pictures and talking about the clouds. And I don't know what your experience was. It rains almost every day, but often it's at night, or even if it's in the day, it'll be misty for half an hour, and then it'll be clear enough to go out and explore. And it's just part of it. I told you about Dingle, this place that is my favorite place. Next time I go, I'm not going to rent a car. I'm not saying I'm going to go again, but if I go, I'm just going to get a bus to take me to Dingle. I'm going to find some cottage or room to stay in, and I'm going to just be there for my full vacation. That'll be a great vacation to me. But that place is so temperate. The Gulf Stream, I mean, Ireland is as far north as Labrador, so it's a high latitude. but the Gulf Stream catches it, and especially on the west side, there are all kinds of palm trees and fuchsia that somebody introduced from Chile that's kind of overtaken the whole countryside, and there's virtually never any snow, very little frost, and so it's a very, even though it's, you would call them chilly days, but it's not, there's nothing like we think of as winter.
That's where the Gulf Stream comes in.
Yeah, the Gulf Stream certainly catches there, and you can see palm trees really all over Ireland. Not that they're native, but people have planted them there, and they seem to do well. So, any observations or questions?
They were very friendly. We went into a pub, sat near the fireplace for a bite to eat. Immediately somebody came over and said, give me your camera, I'll take your picture. I mean, they're just into
Yeah.
people around them.
Yeah,
They really are observant and very friendly.
yes.
It's a very relaxed, good atmosphere.
It is, it is. We found places, we would be driving in a very remote place, there would be a sign for a restaurant, and what it is this old woman's house.
Oh.
And she would invite you right into her kitchen, and she had just a few things on the menu, and she'd just prepare it for you there and visit with you, and you were the only person, you were the only people who were there. Just very friendly in that way.
Did you visit any churches or cathedrals or anything?
Yeah, sure.
What was the church like?
Churches. Well, of course, you can visit a lot of historical churches that mostly are Catholic or medieval churches. There's a great building in Galway called St. Nicholas Church that almost certainly Christopher Columbus worshipped in. You know, Columbus, there's a lot of connection between Ireland and Spain historically, and there's a strong support for the idea that shortly before he left for the New World that Columbus was in Ireland, in Galway, and that he would have worshipped at that church. We look for not Catholic churches on Sunday, and sometimes we're just in a situation where, well, one time, for example, we were coming back from Scotland, and we were thinking, well, on Saturday, we'll take the ferry back from Scotland to Belfast, and there was a church, Robin Marks, the church that he's the worship leader at there in Belfast, and our plan was, my daughter had a friend who was a nephew of the pastor at that church. So we get to the ferry in this little town in Scotland, and we thought that it left at 3 in the afternoon. It left at 3 in the morning. So we were stuck there in this little town. Good thing it was kind of a fair day or something there. The little town was crowded with people, so we ended up staying an extra night, and the long story short is we didn't get to church that day. We visited a very fine little Nazarene church of about 125 people just on the outskirts of Dublin one year. And some of them worked in a center for developmentally disabled adults, and they had a large ministry to them. I bet in that church of 125 they might have had 35 developmentally challenged or whatever adults, and so that was interesting. We still have, so here's another example of their friendliness. We're there, and after church, this couple speaks to us. They invite us, we never met them before that Sunday service, they invite us to their house. They have a meal for us. We enjoy their hospitality all afternoon. And we wanted to go to Powers Court Gardens, which is this enormous estate with a touristy place. So nothing would do but what he had to, we had a rental car, but he went in front of us and showed us the quick way to get there, and I think he paid for our admission. You know, we just encountered that kind of generosity and friendliness again and again.
On that same trip, we went to a Presbyterian cathedral. I would have thought Catholic when I walked in.
Yeah.
It was big and ornate, but it was definitely Presbyterian. It was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
We went to a service there.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Protestantism started, in the British Isles between, like the 15th century,
Yeah.
when they were having trouble between the royalty and the Pope and
Yes.
the cardinals and all of
Right,
that.
right. And of course, that's a big part of Irish history, this very bitter struggle that was largely imposed by British people, because for several hundred years it was illegal even to be Catholic. It was illegal for there to be a mass anywhere, and so they would have their services out in the woods or in people's homes, you know, and so there's just an enormous bitterness there. But it's interesting, even though you don't think of it in this way, it's interesting that the struggle for independence was not just a Catholic struggle. There were many Protestant Irish who also wanted to be free of the British, and I think that there's a large, you know, the power of the Catholic Church has diminished a lot since from my generation on. There's still plenty of people who call themselves Catholic, but there does seem to be a real strong multiplication of evangelical churches and Protestant churches all over the place, but especially in the cities. Yeah. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.